continuing education for our member libraries. Alicia, we'll go to you next.
I'm Alicia Olvers. I am the new director for Central Kansas Library System. Still getting to know everyone and learn what the job is about. So I'm looking forward to meeting all of you in person if I haven't already.
Welcome. Alphabetically, Joy, you're next. Miss Joy, we can't hear you. There
Okay,
we go.
I just got unmuted. Hi, I'm Joy, and I am in the Outreach Services Department. So if you have any questions about rotating books, feel free to reach out.
Welcome. Diane.
There it is. I'm Diane Bott. I'm the Youth Services Collection Manager here at CKLS.
Liz.
Hi, everybody. I'm Liz Chuklo. I'm your general consultant.
Welcome. Ashley. We can't hear your wonderful voice, Miss Ashley. She's one of the tech people. Okay, Ashley will leave and she will be back. All right. Andy.
Andy Midgner, CKLS IT Manager.
Thank you. Lacey.
I'm Lacey Steffen. I am the office assistant.
Welcome. And Melissa.
Hi, I'm Melissa Watson, and I'm the cataloger.
Welcome, CKLS. Just to let you know, we do have 5 new libraries. We do have 5 new libraries since the first part of the year, so you will start to see even more new faces. Good afternoon. I am Patty Collins. I am one of your consultants here at CKLS, and I'm happy to introduce a longtime friend of mine. Becky Heil and I met through the Association for Rural and Small Libraries, and I called on Becky a couple years ago and I said, "Hey, we're going to do a consulting swap thing." And I was like, and that was great. And then we put it aside, and we put it aside, and we put it aside. And then she called me up and she said, "Hey, do you want to do a thing?" And I'm like, "Yeah, only if you do." And then she says, "Well, we have to do mine fast because I get to retire." So Becky is kicking our 2026 Tuesdays with CKLS sessions off, and she's going to talk about the basics of weeding. So Becky, you may take it away.
All right. Thank you very much, Patty. As she said, we met through the Association for Rural and Small Libraries and have both been doing consulting for a very long time. I am a district consultant for the State Library of Iowa, so we're set up kind of the same way you guys are, where we've got some districts and then we've got consultants who work with each of those. We only have one consultant in each of our districts, each of our 6 districts, however. So I'm it in the Southeast District. I have 92 libraries and 22 counties that I work with in our district. And then I do a lot of teaching and training across the state. So I am going to go ahead and share my screen. Let's hope that this goes as smoothly as I want it to. All right, I think that looks like everything is doing what it's supposed to. Oh, yep, there it is. Oh, I'll get the chat out of the way, sorry. All right, there we go. So I have been working in libraries for a very, very long time. I have done everything in public libraries, from riding on the bookmobile and providing services there, to reader's advisory, to reference, to circulation clerk, to director. I have worked in libraries from 300 population up into about 60,000 population. And I have been doing some form of this weeding presentation for about 20 years now. It's gone through a lot of iterations. The very first one I did was called Weed 'em and Weep No More, which I kind of liked as sort of the beginning. We had one called Weed 'em and Reap. Another one that I used to do a lot, I called Just Do It with the old Nike slogan. And then I was afraid that I was going to get slapped by Nike. So I quit doing it with the little Nike swoosh on that one. I have done one called Keep Calm and Weed On. And then the last one was Weed to Achieve. I really like this. This collection cultivation was actually a series that I did for the State Library. We had 4 pieces to this series, and the title came from one of my colleagues who came up with the collection cultivation. And it really is a basic. So my apologies if you guys have done this before and you kind of know what you're doing here. What I hope is that, even if it's sort of going through some of the basics with you, maybe you'll at least come with sort of a refreshed sense of getting ready and energized to go back out there and do some weeding, because I know it's one of the least favorite jobs for a lot of librarians. So I always kind of start with that. If you guys have done using the Zoom emoticons here, if you would raise your hand if you like to weed. Ooh, I'm seeing a few. All right. There's a few people who say they like to weed. So I consider myself the weeding queen. In fact, here at the State Library, there's kind of a joke that goes around that I should have a T-shirt that looks, whoops, I beg your pardon here, that looks like this. When in 1983, I was a cocky 25-year-old, freshly degreed children's librarian. I walked into my first job and I blithely announced that at least half your collection needs to go. Unfortunately, I was right. And within about 5 years, I had removed nearly 2/3 of the, oops, sorry, I'm getting weird stuff here out of the way. There we go. I had weeded nearly 2/3 of that collection. Now, luckily, we had some extra money that year, so I was able to actually purchase a whole lot of new quality books. All of our measures shot through the roof. The number of visits went bonkers after I did that, and obviously circulation went up dramatically too. That was kind of my first taste of power, and I really kind of liked that. So since then, I have become a passionate advocate for weeding, and I really do think it is one of my most favorite things to teach. These quotes actually came from the crew manual, which we'll talk about in a little bit here. And I kind of like these because it shows that weeding in libraries is kind of an old problem. Are there any of these quotes that resonate with you? Excuse me. I ended up with some allergies over the weekend, so hopefully I don't end up coughing too much here. Are there any of these quotes that resonate with you? You can see this very first one came from 1901. Here's the second one. 1938, again, sort of an age-old problem in libraries. And this is one I think that we stuck in the description for this class. I don't know if any of you have been around a while. Will Manley had a column in Booklist called The Manley Arts, and this was something that he put in 1996. Again, 1901, 1938, 1996. And then Anne Felix, who actually wrote the crew manual, put this in the, I think, late 90s, early 2000s. And I kind of like this one. A good library collection is like a good haircut. It's not what you cut, it's what you leave. So again, feel free if there's any of these that really resonate with you in terms of why you don't like or maybe do like weeding. I'm happy to take a look at those in the comments. And we're not going to actually do this one as a poll. And hopefully I can bring up the chat here. I seem to have lost it someplace here. And maybe Liz or Patty, if you guys want to kind of read some of those out for me. I always start with this question. Why don't you weed? I hear from my librarians all the time. It's the last thing on my list, and so it never gets done. I'm always behind on that. What are some of the reasons that you guys have? Oh, there's my chat. There we go. That you don't weed. Anything in there? I've got some answers, but I always like to hear from all of you guys.
Well, I'm going to tell you, okay, time. Raimi said time. That's not
Yup.
surprising. We're going to get to those magic four things I always talk about, I bet. Um, the one thing that the one that I feel I hear the most is um, we're not going to have anything left.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard, or someone has told me that weeding is kind of like censorship.
Yep. I've heard that one. We can't get rid of the classics. Absolutely. I've heard that one as well. All right, let's move on then. So here are some of the ones that I came up with as I talked to. But yeah, what do we do with those books that we weed and complaints from patrons? We're going to talk about that a little bit later here. Oh yeah, it's my favorite. I got to tell you, that's one of the stories that I tell all the time. When I was a little girl, my dad used to read the Flicka and Dicka books to us, and it was just our favorite ones. And I can still hear my dad saying those. And when I went to that library and I said, you need to get rid of 2/3 of your or half of your collection, they had Flicka and Dicka in there. And now I was in the early 60s when I was reading those, and this was in the 80s when those came up. It was really, really hard. But I will tell you, I bought all of those at the book sale, so they are now sitting down in my basement. So my favorites went home with me. So here's some of the reasons that I've heard. It's sacrilege to throw out a book. It's a book. How can you get rid of a book? But what if somebody wants it someday? We hear a lot, something is better than nothing. That the one that somebody mentioned here, if I get rid of all the bad stuff, I'm not going to have anything left here. Another one that I've heard, not as much lately, but yeah, people are stealing stuff all the time anyway. Why do we need to bother getting rid of stuff? It's going to sort of get gone through attrition. And maybe it's worth something. I'm sure some of you have maybe heard that from your patrons. How can you get rid of that? It might be worth something. If I'm doing the selection in my library and I choose these books and then they don't go out and I have to weed it because it hasn't gone out, does that mean I made a bad choice or that was a bad decision? So does it mean that I look bad because I bought these things and then I had to weed them? I have also heard weeding just seems so arbitrary. How do I know what should be weeded? What makes it different when I do it from when my colleague down the road might weed their collection? It seems very unstructured to people, and so they don't want to be making those decisions. I don't know how. We hear that, and I don't have time. Those are a lot of the answers that I have heard as I have kind of wandered my way through the state. So let's see, I've got stuff all over the place here. All right, there we go. One more, there we are. So if we know why we don't weed, why should we weed? What are the reasons that we need to do this? All right, we all know, yeah, our consultants tell us we have to weed or it's part of our standards or whatever those reasons are. But what are the real reasons underneath? Why do they tell us this is what we're supposed to be doing? So this one I think is really interesting. Relevance is one of the reasons that we want to weed books. So we're getting back to that idea of it's not really arbitrary. It's not really unstructured. If it's not relevant, if it's inaccurate, if it has bias, if it's sexist or racist, that's a good reason to get rid of it. And I will tell you again, back in 1983, when I walked into that library, they actually had this book sitting on the shelf. It says, boys are doctors, girls are nurses. Boys are policemen, girls are meter maids. 1980s, and this book was still sitting on the library shelf. That kind of relates to this whole idea of relevance. We do have to be careful though when we're thinking about inaccurate. You can't read everything that's in your library. So how do you know that these things are inaccurate or not? So that's one of the things that you have to kind of be careful of. This book was titled "I'm Glad I'm a Boy, I'm Glad I'm a Girl," and it was written in 1970. Now, granted, this one that's up on the screen here is a really blatant example, and it's from, close to 50 years ago. There are lots of books in our collections that are old, and there's also new titles that might be racist or have some other type of bias. So when we're looking at those collections, make sure you're thinking about things like relevance. Another reason we weed currency. There's lots of stuff in our collections that are outdated. Do you have a lot of titles about Michael Jordan in your collection? Yeah, he was popular. He's popular again back in the 80s and 90s when I was buying children's books. You might think he's the greatest basketball player of all time, but today, do those kids walking through your doors want Michael Jordan, or do they want Steph Curry or LeBron James? They aren't looking for Madonna. They don't even know who Madonna is. K-pop demon hunters, that's who they're going to be in your building looking for right now. The other one that I think of when I think about currency, a lot of the questions that I get are people say, yeah, but history doesn't change. So if we're looking at historical things, is currency really so important? No, history doesn't change, but our interpretation of it does. So think about some of the things that may have changed philosophically in the last 50 years when we're looking at some of the historical events and our perspective of some of those things. So that's another reason, is that whole idea of currency. Appeal. I always throw this one in here. Now, these pictures might be a little bit dramatic, but nobody wants to check out a book with a sticky cover. Recovering is a really easy way to refresh that book. Now, hopefully your patrons' hands don't look like this after your collection. However, I am here to tell you I have worked in library collections where after I've been done either weeding or doing some shelving or shifting or something, my hands did look like those ones on the right side of the screen there. So appeal. Get rid of those things that aren't clean and aren't attractive. Circulation, that's an obvious one. I really like the quote that's on here. Small but useful just makes good sense. Customers don't want to be overwhelmed with choices. That's one reason why you will probably notice when they walk into your building, they go through that new book section. Yeah, part of it's because it's new and maybe they've read a lot of your other stuff. But another reason is it's small enough that they can look over the entire collection. It's maybe a couple of shelves. I believe that bookmobiles are popular partially because of this. Most users really like having a small selection to choose from. One quote that I really like, again from the crew manual, is a good library is not necessarily a big library. Having a lot of books that people don't want is not the answer to the demand for more books. And I think I saw that go through on the chat there. Somebody wrote something very similar. Um, something that kind of drives me nuts is when a library director calls me up and they say, how do I get people to check out more books? And I start kind of talking through the things, and then we start looking at their collection, and I find out that their entire collection is made up of donations that were given to them when citizens cleaned out their basements. Stuff might have been popular 5 years ago, but anybody that wanted to read that book did it when it first came out. Public libraries need to be adding the titles their communities want to read, not just what somebody else is trying to get rid of. Accessibility. This kind of goes along with some of those previous reasons. When books are all jammed on the shelf, it makes it hard to find anything. This picture kind of reminds me of that new PBS TV show. I don't know if any of you have seen it, called Bookish. If you've ever seen his bookstore, it kind of looks like this. Books are sideways and shoved on the top and sitting on piles. Now, the guy who owns that bookstore might be able to find stuff in that mess, but it makes it really hard for other people to find what they're looking for when it looks like this. So when we can clean out some of those titles that we don't need anymore, it makes it a lot easier for folks to find what they're looking for. Collection development. I think there's a couple of things in here. Certainly a better collection equals more circulation. For non-library folks, that seems counterintuitive. Wouldn't you think the more stuff we have, the better our circulation is? Study after study after study has shown that is absolutely the opposite of what happens. The smaller, more curated collections tend to circ a lot more. So when you are weeding, you're going to notice a whole lot of things. You might notice that there's some things that are never on the shelf. They check out all the time. You might need more copies of those. You can also notice holes in your collection. Maybe there's holes in the series, or maybe there's holes in your nonfiction. So as you're going through book by book and doing that weeding, you're going to notice that stuff. I threw out a whole bunch of old books on dentistry one time, and I realized after I got rid of them all, we didn't have anything. We literally had no books once I got rid of all the old junk. So then I had to go searching to find something to refill that hole. So as you're looking at those circulation patterns, hopefully it means you can make better choices for the future. It gives you that feedback of what it is that people are actually looking for. Another reason, space. We all know that libraries have changed in the last few decades. We need space for other stuff besides books. We want space for things like computers, additional seating, room for programming. And even though we want to be, we cannot be all things for all people. Nobody, even the largest library in your state, can provide everything that their customers want. And then I always sort of finish this one with, wouldn't it be really fun to live in the picture on the left there? I mean, how cool would that be for your house? Patrons and staff can waste a whole lot of time if you have to plow through tons of junk materials to find what you want. Some patrons just want to get in, get their stuff, and get out. We need to help with that by having that weeded collection. The other piece of that is square footage is expensive. If you have too much junk, you might think you need more space than you actually do. So I was going through this presentation about a week ago, and on my original one that I put together, why should we weed it? The state says so. And that's an Iowa standard that we have that says you have to weed 3%. And I thought, I should probably look and see if that's a Kansas standard as well. And by golly, there it is, standard number 25. And I couldn't find any newer version, so my apologies for the 20 to 24. But what number standard 25 says is the library has a continuous weeding program. A minimum of 3% of the materials in the collection is withdrawn annually. So why should we weed? Yeah, the state says we need to. And then kind of related to that is the library annually adds items to the collection equal to, but not less than 4% of the total collection. I think our Iowa standard used to be 5%, but I'm thinking we maybe got rid of that one. What that means, if you do the math there, is no matter what, even if you weed continuously, like this says, you're still going to grow by 1%. So you're going to want to start with those less full shelves, because that's going to make it easier for you to keep up with that so you don't outgrow your building quite as fast. So this is something I found a long time ago. This is one of the very first things I put in my presentation that I do. So if you're at home or you're, working in a school or wherever, and you find some milk and it's curdled and it's outdated and it's lumpy, would you keep it because you don't know when you might get to the store? Would you give it to a neighbor to keep in her house because she might need it? Would you keep it because otherwise your refrigerator would be empty? Would you donate it to a food pantry for hungry children? So, if a book is outdated with misinformation, why would you keep it because you don't know when you'll be able to replace it? Why would you give it to another library because they have more space? Why would you keep it? Because if you weeded everything that needs to be weeded, the shelves would be empty. And why would you send outdated resources to be used by children in another country? I hear that and I see Patty shaking her head on that one. Again, that library that I was in, the Friends of the Library wanted to come and take all of my weeded stuff and ship it off to Africa. And I'm like, really? Why would they need a 40-year-old copy of Traveling to Europe in the 1970s. They don't want it either. So what do we hope to accomplish with all of this weeding? We really want a better collection. We want to get rid of those materials that are dated or inaccurate. We want to keep the things or relocate the things that are useful to our public. We want to, oops, my apologies here. We want to improve access to the collection. We want to make sure that we keep those things of historical significance. And that's what I didn't really talk about in those other things, why we weed. But it does help you when you go through book by book to find those things that might be historically relevant that got buried in your collection before. So it helps you kind of find those and to make sure that you're hanging on to them. And then it also gives you good data for future collection development. If you start seeing a pattern in materials that have not gone out and not gone out and not gone out, you can start thinking about, why isn't that being used in our community? So maybe I don't need to buy those, or maybe I don't need to buy as many of that, or I don't need to buy in that area. So then the question becomes, how do I start? Where do I actually begin? Now I know, yeah, I don't like weeding, but I understand why I have to weed. So how do I actually do it? So I always start with policy. That's kind of a state library thing. Everything that we do always goes back to policy. If you think about what we call this as the life cycle of a book, it starts with that policy up there in the left-hand corner. And down on the bottom, it ends with the idea of disposal. How do we get rid of them? What do we do with them? So make sure you write a good collection development policy. When you're writing that policy, absolutely be sure to include weeding in that. Another thing that I like about adding weeding in there is you can always use that to back up your decisions, just like you do with purchasing. If a patron comes in and asks, why you bought this or why that's on your shelf, or if just happened today in my community, the Board of Supervisors came in and said, why did you buy that, or why did you get rid of this one? You can go back to that policy and say, here's what our policy, our board has vetted this idea, and this is why we purchased it. It fits with the policy that we as a public library adhere to. Same thing with weeding. We got rid of this because of our policy that says we are a library. We'll talk about that in a second. We're a library that's for popular materials. And if that's what we're here for our community, if this isn't a popular material, it needs to go. So again, when you're writing that policy, when you're looking at it, ask yourself, does your collection meet your mission? And what I just mentioned, if your mission is to provide current materials that patrons want to read, does your collection do that? You might need to weed in order to accomplish that goal. So some of the things that you want to consider when you're writing this policy, here's some of the criteria. I'm not going to read through all of these, but again, like I just mentioned, your goals and your mission. What is it that your library is set up to do? You also certainly want to think about your community. Ask yourself, am I an archival library? Most public libraries in Iowa for sure, and I'm betting in Kansas as well, are not archival libraries. I'm sure you've got those, but they're not your typical public libraries. If you're not an archive, you don't need to keep all those things, like all those old classics that nobody is reading, or some of that really ephemeral historical stuff. Make sure that those materials are in the places where people expect to find them. We also think about the internet and how do we incorporate that into our weeding policy. If I think back to when I started my career and we were always trying to update our travel books, because that just changed so fast. We were buying the mobile travel guides or whatever they were, or the the international ones, and it was like every year there was so much change that we had to keep buying new ones. When you think about the internet, is that how people are using your library anymore? Do they come and take a book that's got the most current information they're going to be able to find online somewhere? Although they're not going to be able to find the travel information that we used to be able to get from the State Department, but that's another whole story. And then also the idea of interlibrary loan. I work again with some of my smaller libraries on this. They're in a finite space. They are not going to ever be able to get more square footage. And so they have to check very carefully to what they keep. Series is a really hard one. I hate it as a patron. When I go to the shelf and I see book 1 and 2, and then 6, 7, and 8 are there, and there's nothing in the middle. But that's where interlibrary loan can come in. It's nice to have 1 and 2 there so that they can start thinking about, oh yeah, this would be a good series. I'd like to start this one. And it's nice to have those new ones. You know, as they come out, you're catching those new ones. But if they want that stuff in the middle, borrow it from somebody else who's got it. I think interlibrary loan needs to be something when you're thinking about policy and how you're purchasing or how you're weeding, that needs to be addressed in there. Weeding can be very controversial. I'm sure some of you have already dealt with this in your life as a library director. A really well-prepared and fully documented policy on weeding can lessen or alleviate some of those misunderstandings. Now, a policy is not going to replace your individual judgment or your common sense, but it will help make your actions more understandable to the public. And I think that's something that's important as we're trying to kind of explain ourselves when people come in with questions. So here's my little Nike slogan, just do it so I don't tell anybody, but I put that on there. So now let's start thinking about how exactly are we going to do this? I want you to take a look at things like your mission statement and your goals. I want you to have in the back of your head your collection development policy. I want you to think about your community. Think about your usage statistics. Are your children's books the ones that go out the most, your picture books? If that's what's being checked out the most, where is your money going? What are you looking at in terms of space? What can I get rid of so I can add more children's books because it's obvious that's what my community is telling me they want. We can use lists, you know, best of lists, those kinds of things. We certainly want to check the shelves. And then also something that I thought was really interesting, before you start weeding, go back and look at what you're borrowing from other libraries. What are people asking you to interlibrary loan? So as you're looking at that weeding, if this is stuff that you're borrowing from other libraries, you want to make sure your collection development kind of takes account for that. So the crew manual I've mentioned several times. Again, I've got a little bit more coming up later. It was done by the Texas State Library. It was originally done in the 1970s. It was redone in 2008. It was done again in 2012. They did an update, I think, sometime after that. And for a lot of years, we considered this the gold standard for public libraries. It was a manual that was written about weeding and how to do it. And a lot of the content that I've got in here came from there. However, the Texas State Library is no longer updating or even making it available out there. It used to be available for free. You went to their website, you could download it, and you got your whole book. It's not on the Texas State Library anymore because, again, it hasn't been updated in quite a while, so they've pulled it off. However, it's out in a lot of other places that you can get to that. I think the other idea that I want to get across here is two things, I guess. The first one is something is not better than nothing. That's kind of one of my refrains as I teach this, and it comes up multiple times when I'm doing this. Just because you have a book on dentistry or headaches or Africa doesn't mean that, you know, because you've got something there, that means you have a good collection. Something is not always better than nothing. Outdated, wrong, poorly presented information is not better than empty space. Again, think about those travel books. 2005 travel books. Is there anything useful left in there? You know, things have changed. Restaurants are changed. They're closed. They're not there. Reviews might be off base. And then again, as I mentioned earlier, think about the advances in medicine. So I think one of the best quotes about that is from the crew manual down on the bottom here. Libraries aren't in the business of accumulating physical objects. Sometimes we think we are, and sometimes our patrons think that's what we should be doing. But what we're really doing is providing content and access to that content. So I really like that as kind of a explanation of what libraries are. It's not to just have a bunch of stuff. So what do I read? I'm looking at my shelves. How do I decide? Getting back to that idea of it's not really arbitrary. There are some very concrete things. Poor appearance, that's an obvious one. You can have anybody kind of go through and do that. It's an easy way as a first pass. And I have done that before. When I know I've got a really bad collection that needs to be done, sometimes I just do a really fast first pass, and anybody can do that. You can have volunteers come in and do that. This part, when we're looking at poor appearances, just take them off the shelf. Then you can have somebody go through and decide, do we need to buy another copy of this because it's junky and it's worn out, or it's not bound, or there's pages that are torn, or the print is too tiny, or it's lousy pictures. Whatever those issues are with it, yank it off your shelves and then decide, do we need to buy another copy? Do we need to buy a different title? Do we need to just toss this one? That's a fast and easy way to kind of start, and it helps you feel a little bit better because you got rid of some of the stuff and it's really obvious that you needed to get rid of it. Another one, again, is a little bit trickier, but poor content. Again, you can't read everything, so how do you know that it's poor content? Excuse me. I like this idea. If it's outdated, if it's obsolete, if it's trivial, mediocre, inaccurate, if it's a series that you don't have everything that isn't being printed anymore, there aren't being copies added to it anymore, things that are superseded, stuff that's not circulating, stuff that's biased, racist, sexist. So that whole idea of content, again, some of this you can just yank pretty quickly. There's others that you're going to want to take your time and make a decision on whether or not this one should stay or go. Unused. To me, this is the easiest one. Again, back when I started in libraries, we had the old cards in pockets, and I could literally pull the card out and see, this one checked out 5 times since 1972. It might be time to get rid of this one. And then we sort of went through a period where we weren't stamping and our automation systems weren't really all that great, and it was sort of a pain, but it's so much easier now with an automation system. You print out that list of it, nothing that's checked out in the last 5 years or whatever it is, whatever you decide. And then you can go through that. And again, this is a great place to use volunteers. They can take that list and they pull it off. They're not making the final decision, but they're getting it off your shelf. And then you can go through as the expert and figure out, oops, no, we have to keep this one even though it hasn't gone out because it's written by a local author or whatever it is. So you can make those decisions, but just having somebody else to physically go through and pull those books off, I think is a really good way. Certainly the other thing that I think of with this is, I loved when I could get rid of a whole format. When it was finally time to get rid of all of my videotapes, it's like, wow, I opened up 5 whole sections of space in my library by just making the decision once. I didn't have to decide this one, that one, or the other one. Keep it, at some point, it got to the point where I could say, yep, the whole thing needs to go, and we're going to get rid of this. I loved doing that one. I don't think that happens quite as much anymore, but you only have to make the decision once that way. Another one is an entire author who's not popular anymore. Again, this is sort of showing my age. There was a series called Wagons West by Dana Fuller Ross, written in the 70s and 80s. I loved it. It was super popular for 10 years. We could not keep those things on the shelf, but it took up a lot of space. There were a lot of books in that series. When I finally made the decision to weed that entire thing, again, I got multiple shelves by making the decision once. Let's get rid of the whole series. So kind of think through that as some of those things kind of get past their prime, if you can make one decision and make it really easy. Let's see. So this, I think, is sort of interesting. The title on the crew manual is A Weeding Manual for Modern Libraries. Maybe not so much when it was last updated in 2012. And again, it's no longer available through the Texas State Library. I did read this as I was kind of looking this up here. There is some speculation that it has to do with the fact that the crew manual was actually quoted in a lawsuit that was filed a couple of years ago in Texas. I thought that was sort of interesting. but it's still out there and in other places. Some of their articles I think are still really good, and some of the tables that we're going to look at in a second here, I think can also be really good, especially if you're new to weeding. So I recommend kind of, if you can find a copy of this that maybe, sitting in your back room someplace, take a look at some of the information that's in here, especially the weeding nonfiction. There's a library network in New York, I know, that has it out there, and there were 2 or 3 other places that I found. So if you just do a little Google search for that. The other piece that I like is the acronym CREW stands for Continuous Review, Evaluation, and Weeding. I like that idea of continuous. It's really painful when you weed, once every 3 years and you have to go through the entire collection. So we'll talk in a sec about some ways that you can kind of get past that. But that whole idea of your whole collection should be being looked at sort of constantly, I think, is a really good idea. Review is obvious, and evaluation, I think, is kind of obvious there. So for me, this is the most important part, and I used it the most, I think, when I was working on weeding. They have these tables where they break down Dewey numbers by big swaths, like the 370s, which, education. And they have this piece underneath, this piece connected to that says 10, 3, and then musty. I'm going to go look at each of those in turn so that you can understand. But you can see the education said was 10-3 musty. Space and astronomy is 5-3 musty. 636 pets is 5-2 musty. So here's what they mean. The first figure refers to the years since the book's latest copyright date. So now we know how old this stuff is. So in education, at that time, they said education, philosophy, or information that's less than 10 years old is probably still okay. So that's what that 10 means by education there. Space and astronomy stuff, yeah, we don't want anything that's 10 years old. 5 years is the max that you can go for that. Pets, 5 years max on that as well. The second number then in that place means it refers to the maximum time without usage. So in education, if it hasn't gone out in 3 years, it's time to get rid of it. Space and astronomy, if it hasn't gone out in 3 years, time to get rid of it. Pets, if it hasn't gone out in 2 years, time to get rid of that. So that's what I really like about this, is it sort of helps us remove that arbitrariness from it. There's some rules that you can actually use as you're beginning to learn how to do weeding. Does this substitute for your judgment? Absolutely not. It's just a good way. You find an education book that is still being taught in the curriculum in your community college. Doesn't matter if it didn't go out. Maybe it's being used in the building. So all of this is a good beginning, but it doesn't replace your judgment as you're going through this. They are guidelines, and they are not a substitute for professional judgment and common sense, for that matter, as well. So now let's take a look at those that musty information. Musty stands for M, misleading. Is there stuff that's in there that's factually inaccurate? Time to get rid of it. Is it ugly, worn beyond mending? Kind of the same things we've been talking about here. Time to get rid of it. Is it superseded? Get rid of it. Is it trivial? This one throws me off a little bit, I think. That first part, no discernible literary or scientific merit. Well, for God's sakes, we've got a lot of stuff in our collections that don't have any discernible literary merit. However, I do like their second definition there, ephemeral. And it might be things like there was that time when macrame was really huge, and I bought probably 15 macrame books. And then nobody was interested in macrame anymore. It was ephemeral. It came and went. Same thing with, Hannah Montana or whatever it is. Those things that kind of come and go that are sort of fads, those are the things. It may have been highly sought after in the past, but if it's not anymore, that's trivial. Irrelevant. Another one that I remember throwing out in the library that I was at was something about ocean-going vessels. And I was in Iowa on the Mississippi. It's like, nobody cares about ocean-going vessels here. Easy choice to get rid of that one. And then material that can be found elsewhere. When we talked about things like the internet or interlibrary loan, where else can you find this information? So that's kind of the idea of how many years old is the book? how many years since it's been checked out, and does it have any of these musty factors, are again good ways to evaluate. These are some sort of quick and dirty things that again came from the crew manual that I like, and we've kind of been through all of these. One that I think that a couple that are, I guess, that are in here that I thought are kind of interesting. Older single title authors, you know, that sort of one hit wonder guy. He wrote that one book 20 years ago and nobody cares anymore, and he hasn't written anything since then. Might be time to get rid of that one. Knockoffs of popular authors or popular series. That I think we haven't seen quite as many, but back to Lemony Snicket things, that series of unfortunate events, because that became popular really fast, there were a lot of authors writing sort of similar things. So we might want to keep the Lemony Snicket, but we don't need to keep those knockoffs anymore, or the Harry Potter knockoffs. It might be time to get rid of some of those. The simplified books, the abridged classics, again, if your community is reading those, fine, keep that. But for the most part, that's not something that you need to keep. How am I doing on time here? Oh, pretty good. I'm just about ready here. So again, came from the crew manual. I really like this list of how to do weeding in 10 steps. Make it part of your policy. We've talked about that. Get those circulation statistics reports out there. Make sure it is built into your year's work calendar. Gather up everything that you need for it, your sticky notes, your pens, your manuals, your book cards, your disposal slips. Get it all together. Take a look at the whole area. So if I'm weeding the 400s or I'm weeding the, picture books, look at the whole thing. I think the idea, sometimes when I do this in a longer session, I have sort of a conversation with folks about, do you want to do inventory at the same time? I think that can be very useful, but it takes about 10 times longer if you're inventorying at the same time that you're weeding. So that's kind of a discussion you want to have amongst yourselves. You and your staff, you and your board, think about the time that it takes. Sometimes it's a good idea, sometimes it's not. If you've got some good lists out there, and the name just went right out of my head, and I don't think I have that written in here. I used to use the Wilson products, which I don't remember what they're named anymore, but it was kind of the best of the best, and it was things like, I might not have read that, or I might not have bought that, I might not know anything about that book, but it is one that somebody's likely going to come in and ask for later because it was it is something that could be highly popular that I might not know about. So make sure you're kind of checking against some of those lists if you can find those. Treat according to the slips. What they recommend is when you pull the book off, you put a slip in it, whether it's a sticky note or a pre-printed slip that says, just toss this one. This one we need to find a replacement copy because it's, the pages are falling out and we know people are going to keep reading it. So find a replacement. So that goes to your order pile. So you're going to order new ones. Another one on your slip might be, yeah, I got rid of all my dentistry books as I'm kind of looking at the whole section. So I need to buy some dentistry ones. None of these particular ones, but make sure you get something on dentistry or migraines or whatever it is. So put those slips in it. Once you're back to the collection, back to the back room with your cart full of books that you're going to weed, then start doing what it says on your slips. Sometimes your slip might say, put this on a display. This is one that I know would go out if it's on a display. So that might be a good one. Again, replacement checking and ordering, and then set up those displays. There's non-print I find a lot harder, and I kind of want to get through this because there's some things at the end I want to make sure that I get to here. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. For me, I don't think copyright date is nearly as important when we're dealing with DVDs. Harry Potter was what, 90s when those movies came out, maybe early 2000s. A book from the 2000s I might not keep, but a Harry Potter DVD, I'm not getting rid of that. I know that one's still going out. So I think you're going to be relying more on the circulation and the condition when you're deciding what to weed there on non-print things. Weeding digital is a whole other hour-long class that we could go through. So again, some of the things, you think, all right, it's digital, it's not taking up any space. Do I really need to weed it? So you want to think about things like copyright date. Again, if it's got old information that you don't want it even on a virtual shelf. If you're providing, your mission is to provide the best resources possible, You want to get rid of that outdated stuff. Multiple copies. We have a digital collection in Iowa called Bridges. We've got about 160,000 titles in it. It's for the entire state. Not 160,000 titles, 160,000 items. We have up to 60 or 70 copies of some of those. As we start looking at those, we probably don't need 60 copies of Braiding Sweetgrass or whatever some of those titles are. We're going to need more than one, and we're going to want it. We're not going to get rid of it altogether, but start looking at those multiple copies, especially in your digital collections. I think format, sometimes I don't think that is a huge one. And then you can use musty again. That whole idea of, are these things, are there other reasons that we want to get rid of those? This is another one I like to spend time talking to folks about. What about your library of things? Think about, how do you decide weeding that? Does anybody have that in their weeding policy? I don't know very many libraries that do. I have libraries that are asking me about it, and they're starting to think about putting it in their policy. But think about, what are some of the things that you could use to determine it? Repair, replace, weed. What if you lose a piece? Do you get rid of it if you've lost a piece to the game that's in there? Can it be played without that card or that piece? Will the drill operate without a specific drill bit? So maybe our library things, we have a drill that goes out and there's one of the bits that's missing. Do we weed the whole thing? Do we put a note in it? Again, I really kind of like that. I like the fact that people are starting to think about that now and actually write some of those ideas down. Again, probably another 20-minute conversation on weeding the library of things. This was something that I put together quite a while ago. I started probably in about 2012, 2013. We had a weeding cohort where I had about 50 people around the state who all had to do a really intense weeding job on their collection. So we just started 1 month at a time. I don't think we actually started in January, but we talked about overview things. We had some videos. We went through the crew manual, and then in month 3, they all went out and weeded their 0s, their 100s, and their 200s. What was kind of cool was, because they were all in this cohort, they were talking to each other, and they said, well, I weeded the chicken soup for the soul books, did you? And they could kind of talk back and forth about those specific sections. Again, this is just how we divided it up for that. This might not work for you. It seemed to work for most of the small libraries that I was with as a way to divide things up there as we were looking at that. The next step after we finally remove them off of the shelves, you got to remove them from your catalog. I have had librarians talk to me. We have a statewide shared catalog and a shared database. It's not actually a catalog, shared database. And they are being asked for materials that they don't have in their collection. So they get a request to, interlibrary loan something, and they're like, we don't have this in our collection, because the librarian before them didn't bother to remove it from their catalog, and it didn't get removed from that joint catalog that we had statewide. And so they're getting asked for stuff that they don't have. So that's a huge piece of this. Make sure you know and understand how that needs to be pulled from your catalog. And then mark them. I cannot tell you, and my bet is, if you've been working in libraries for a while, it's happened to you. The number of people who bring you books and say, oh, I found this at a book sale, and I'm sure it belongs to you guys, and it was never marked withdrawn. So now you've got to figure out what to do with this book when it comes in. Stamp that baby with drawn or whatever you want to put on it, so that draw an X through the barcode, whatever it is, so that and other folks know that it has been taken from your collection. Getting rid of stuff. This is one, donate sometimes works, sell sometimes works, recycle, donate, sell, recycle, destroy. There's another recycle one, and destroy. Oh, there's more recycle ones. I kind of like some of those. That was sort of a fun one. And then sometimes you do have to actually just get rid of it. Now, I am not going to comment on this because I don't know Kansas law, but in Iowa, because I looked this up last night and I couldn't figure it out. In Iowa, you are not allowed to donate materials to anything other than another state or civic agency. So you can't give your stuff to Goodwill. You can't give it to the another library down the road. You can't even give it to the Boy Scouts or a daycare unless they are, you can't give it to any private entity unless they are a government agency. So you could give it to a public school, you could give it to a jail, you could give it to a Head Start. But again, before you do that, think about, if I don't want this book, do they need it? Now, sometimes we get multiple copies of picture books. Great. If it's a good picture book that you know that daycare is going to be able to use and you can donate to those daycares, fabulous. But again, make sure it's, if it's got ripped pages, they don't want it either. So, things to remember when you're getting rid of stuff. Definitely sit down with your staff and trustees and talk about the process that you're going through. You don't want them to be blindsided by a patron or somebody else coming up. You also don't want to have staff that really don't understand the process. So when somebody asks them or when they want to ask you, why would you get rid of that classic book? You can actually, you've talked to them ahead of time, so it's not a surprise to them. I like this one. Save examples of the most blatant samples of the most blatant examples of materials that shouldn't be in your collection. Like, I literally pulled one, again, 1984, but I pulled one out of my library that said, "Someday man may go to the moon." I can keep that on my shelf, so when somebody comes in and says, "You're throwing away tax dollars," I can show them that book and say, "Here's the stuff I'm throwing away. This is why I got rid of some of that stuff." Again, make weeding an ongoing process. Check your city or county policies about what to do with items paid for tax dollars. Even if there's no state law, a lot of cities or whoever your entity is have policies because they don't want the guy who cuts the grass to go off and sell the lawnmower to his neighbor down the street. So a lot of times there are rules. So make sure you're aware of what those rules are. Don't make your weeded books a problem for somebody else. Don't pile them in the library. I will admit I was guilty of that. I was pulling things and stuff that didn't fit on the shelves and they were in piles. And it was a horrible hazard in that building. Don't keep hundreds of them in the attic or the basement just in case somebody objects or somebody wants something that you got to go and, dig through the pile to kind of find it. And don't take hundreds of them to the landfill. So what's stopping you now? This is a lovely weeded garden, just like your collection should be. And so this is like I said, I like to think of myself as the weeding queen. So I went longer than I was supposed to, but anybody in Iowa knows I always do that anyway. So I'm going to stop sharing. And I will be here if anybody's got any questions or conversation.
So I will pop in while Liz keeps an eye on the chat for questions.
All right.
Uh, I do. I have a self-proclaimed title as well. I believe this is one of the reasons that I'm supposed to work in libraries is to help them make those decisions. And I'm the first one to sit in the children's young adult collection and go, "Oh, it was my favorite book in junior high."
Right.
And I'm also the one to say, "And nobody else will ever read it." So it either goes home with me for one additional read or it goes straight to the trash. And
Yep.
sometimes it goes on my cart a little bit longer before somebody has to pull it out of my hands. But
Yep,
I
been
do
there.
wear, Diane and I both have t-shirts and they say that we throw away books professionally. So so there are t-shirts out there and I am the CKLS contact for weeding your collections. If it's just a little weed, sometimes it's just to get you to your required 3% to meet your standard. And I've been known to do that via text or email a lot because sometimes there's some easy things that I can help you get rid of remotely. But if your library hasn't been professionally weeded by the CKLS staff in a while, there are some considerations that we make. And if we're able to come out and help you weed, and when we do that, we do remove your collection items from your catalog as well. So that next step is done.
Nice.
This requires you to have a conversation with your board, have an agreement signed by your board chair, have a plan for the weeding, set up the appointment, and have a plan for disposal of the materials because CKLS does not bring them back to put them in their recycle bin either. So you have to have a plan.
I have a
But
question for Becky.
go ahead.
How do you talk to a board that does not want to weed, but really, really
Oh,
needs to?
that's a really good question. And I've had those conversations. We talk first about space, and we talk about keeping all of those things and your shelves being so jam-packed that people have stopped coming in because it's too hard to find things, and it's too hard to, get them off the shelves when they're there. So we talk a lot about if you're continuing to buy and your mission is we want to have a good materials collection of what people want. If you've got to keep buying things, it's math. And so we talk a lot about that and sort of percentages. The classics are harder, and that whole idea of it's a book, it's sacred, that can be really tough with some people. There are some that I will never convince. We just have to get enough people on the board to understand why it has to be done and let us do it.
I like to advertise the graphic novel classics for them. So it's kind of like a little bit of a updated version of the same stories that they love.
Yeah, oh, I like that. And I bet those are still going out.
Mhm.
Here at CKLS, I do keep a collection that fits on about a foot-long shelf of materials that have been altered and therefore need to be weeded from libraries. One of those most common one is In the Night Kitchen by Maurice Sendak. It is often Mickey often has underpants put on him, or things.
Actually, they drew tidy whities with
Yeah.
with the scene.
Yeah. And then I do have items on that shelf that are often highly contested that allow for the discussion for challenge materials as well as with weeding, because a lot of times I'm finding, at least more recently, when a library contacts CKLS for assistance with weeding, it's because of fear of what's on their shelves. And
Yeah.
they want us to walk in and make those decisions for them to get rid of those things that might be considered unsafe, for lack of a better word. And I understand where they're coming from, but
I'll
we have
bet you're
to
not
remember,
doing
no
it.
matter who the professional is, they're not going to know the details of every single book on your shelf because we've not read them all either. Um, are there questions from you all, or are you observing and thinking this over? CKLS does have a print copy of the 2012 version of the crew manual and other reading documents. And so those things are available here as well. But yes, Lindsay Cupsey was quick and she got it in the chat first off. So it is up there, and the chat will be restored with the video for today's webinar. Oh, yes. Ashley, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us who you are and what you do?
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. My name is Ashley Hernandez, and I help with digital resources, so the catalog, libraryware, those things.
And the important piece, because I don't see but one library in our room today that isn't on Pathfinder Central, and Ashley can tell you the numbers for reports that you might need when you start to weed your collection or look at some of those items that you know on paper need to go. You just don't know how to go find them and how to get started. So and Alicia falls in that says she has a 2008 copy of the crew manual if somebody really wants to peek at the history. But we probably won't be using that as our guide when we help you in 2026 or 2027 to weed your libraries.
Thank you, Miss Patty. I'm going to end the recording unless we have any questions pop up.
You may end the recording. If anybody